welcome back to the channel. Thanks again for joining me on what is quite a pleasant Monday morning. Okay, so last week we had the update from DVSA saying that driving tests and theory tests are again suspended, which has caused quite a lot of frustration amongst you and definitely amongst my students that I've been kind of talking with. What we've heard this morning is the government are looking to reduce the social distancing measures from 2 to potentially 1 metre, which means that potentially we can start thinking about driving lessons commencing. Now, I know with my students, I've got dates in the diary already to start lessons from the 6th of July. But again, what I'm hearing from, again, my students is there's some real worry and anxiety about getting back in the car after having such a long period off. So what I'm going to do in this video is to address and to have a chat with you about driving anxieties, worries, anger, frustration, and some of those signs and symptoms, and even some tips maybe to help you address some of your worries. If you stay right to the end of the video, I do have access to a free online resource that if you are particularly worried about driving and about maybe even the driving test, I can give you access to that resource. So again, stay with me right to the end and I'll discuss that with you and how that works. Okie dokie, let's go. I think what's really important to stress right from the beginning is that everybody who sits in this side of the car does experience at some point a level of anxiety, stress, worry, anger, frustration, and that is not unique. So don't sit there at home watching this thinking, well, I'm the only one that does feel those emotions. Everybody does. Even now for me, when I'm making these videos, I do feel those nerves, that butterfly in my stomach and those sweaty palms. So I guess for us as instructors, it's important to have that conversation with you about, do you feel anxious? What is causing it? Is there a particular occasion when you do feel more anxious than other times? What's causing it is really important. So for me, it's important to understand why we do feel those sweaty palms and that heart beating faster. And quite simply, all that's happening is your body is producing more levels of adrenaline as it realizes that you're beginning to get more stress about a situation. So all that's happening is your body produces more adrenaline, and that's what's making your heart beat faster. Maybe your breathing's a little bit erratic, and you're getting those sweaty palms. What's really important though to also mention is that those worries, that anger, that frustration is only temporary. They will go away. So unlike a headache or like toothache that you cannot often get rid of, worry, fear, anxiety, frustration is temporary and it will go away. So in this video, what we're going to look at perhaps a bit of a strategy and some techniques to help you to combat some of those worries and some of those angers and anger and frustration that you might be experiencing as we get closer to getting driving lessons back up again. So let's have a quick look at this illustration that might help you understand what's going on. So we firstly got those kind of physical symptoms, so the heart racing, your sweaty palms that I definitely experience when making these videos, and often that shortness of breath. And again, those are caused by adrenaline just flowing and pumping through your system more than usual. But you've also got your internal thoughts and your kind of more cognitive side of it. So what you're thinking might be that kind of worst case scenario. So in a minute, well, I'll take an example of a hill start, and it's that, well, what if I roll back on a hill? What if I stall on a hill? So you're only seeing and thinking about the dangers. And it's often that thought of, I can't do that. and which often leads to real frustration and often anger. Now, those two sides, the physical symptoms and your thought process, often affects that behaviour. Let's take an example of a hill start. Now, what often happens is the physical symptoms start to present themselves. So often you get the sweaty palms, or that heart racing, that shortness of breath, and again, all those things that are caused by that rush of adrenaline as your body starts to recognise you're feeling a little bit more stressed than usual. What you've also got as well is those kind of negative thoughts that, what if I stall? What if I roll backwards? That kind of negative self-talk. So you're already beginning to look at kind of the worst case scenario. Now, those two combined, the physical side of it and those kind of negative thoughts and that negative self-talk, often leads to the behaviour, which, as you can see, often causes the car to stall or roll backwards. So what we're going to look at now are some strategies to help you to try to remove the negative kind of self-talk, maybe even some of those physical symptoms, to help you with that hill start or whatever it is that you are perhaps feeling more anxious about. So one of the reasons why I decided to put this video together was based on the number of posts that I'm reading on social media about the general level of worry and anxiety as we approach starting lessons again. There's also a real feeling of a kind of worry about, well, I don't know when I'm going to start, and that's unfortunately the way things are at the moment. A lot of things are up in the air, so again that brings out a whole level of emotion as well. So what's really important is that for some of you, you're able to verbalise your anxiety and your worry, and hopefully you'll be able to talk with your instructor about that. But I wonder how many people out there who are watching this video are not able to verbalise their worries or concerns and kind of burying the head in the sand a little bit. And I guess it's that whole flight or fight response. If we run away from the issue, we're not going to tackle it and we're not going to work through it. It is sometimes easier, and we've all done it. I've definitely done it, where I have just turned away from an issue or a problem, or I've not faced it, and often that it doesn't go away. It's that issue still there that I have to deal with. But what I've often found is when I've tackled that issue, by doing it, I've got a huge sense of empowerment that I've been able to confront that issue. But often, once I've done it, the issue wasn't as big as I thought it was in the first place. And it's like, well, why did I worry about that? Why did I get so concerned about that particular dilemma that I should have faced weeks and weeks ago? So it's really important that from our perspective as instructors, you're able to have a conversation with us about your own levels of anxiety, so we can understand that. What I tend to do with my students, if they start talking about their anxiety levels, it's working out what particularly are they anxious about. Like we saw in the illustration, is it about hill starts? Is it about roundabouts? Is it about driving through busy town centres? Is it about the driving test? And the first thing is, by having that conversation, the issue's out in the open. We can deal with it together, and we can kind of confront that together. I did the video a few weeks ago about the driving test nerves, and often when students talk to me about being nervous about the driving test, the first thing I try to establish is, well, what part of the driving test are you most worried about? Is it your manoeuvre? And we'll go deal with that. Is it your safety question, the show and tell me questions? Are you worried about being asked one of those? Is it being with an examiner for 40 minutes, which is again quite a nerve-wracking experience? So it's important to verbalise it, talk about it, get it out in the open. But once you've done that, it's important that you can kind of quantify that and break it down into kind of small, manageable chunks. Okay, so we've got 5 different tips, strategies, questions, whatever you want to call them, that you might want to think about as we approach kind of starting lessons again. Now, the first one's a question. Is your worry, your fear, your anxiety logical? Is it likely to happen? Is your worst fear likely to happen? And is it something that you can control? Because if you think about it, even though you're driving the car, really, how much control do you have over the car? Because don't forget, we're sat next to you, and what we've got are 2 pedals. So at all time, we have ultimate control of the vehicle. And it's the same as if you're taking a tandem skydive. So you are attached to another instructor, you jump out of the plane. And it does feel like, for that whole time that you're falling, that you are there by yourself, but you're not. You've got another person attached to you. And it's the same with driving lessons. Even though you worry about the worst case scenario, don't forget, we've got somebody next to you who is anticipating what you might do. And if you are particularly anxious about a hill start, for example, what tends to happen is that as you approach that hill, we as instructors can start to anticipate that you might get a little bit more anxious, you might start to get those sweaty palms, and that heart might race, and that breathing might get faster. You might have that shaky leg syndrome, a bit like Elvis, you know. So we've got ultimate control. So is it going to happen, and is it something that you can control? Okay, number 2. What is the effect of thinking the way that you do? Now, what do I mean by that? Let's take the scenario of you have got in the car at the start of your driving lesson, and already you are worried about that roundabout that you generally encounter on your lesson. Now, that roundabout might only be a minute of your entire lesson, but it's a big roundabout and it's busy, and often it's hard to find that gap that you need to then merge into the roundabout. So already you're thinking about something that's not happening, and by thinking about it, the anxiety levels start to increase. So you are already worried about something that's happening, you know, 15, 20 minutes away. And what happens is that affects the entire lesson. I cannot tell you the number of times I've worked with a student who've been particularly anxious and worried about a very small part of their lesson, and that negative self-talk and the doubt that they have got about, well, I can't do that, kind of affects the entire lesson. So all you can do is focus on the here and now. Don't worry about things that A, you might not encounter, and B, you might surprise yourself. You might do really well on it. Number 3, identifying the problem to solve. Now, as I mentioned a bit earlier in the video, it's great that you can perhaps verbalise a particular issue, dilemma, worry that you've got, but for some of you watching this, it might be that you can't do that. The prospect of driving as a whole is something that causes you to be quite anxious. So what I've got here are 6 steps that you might be able to work with your instructor to perhaps look at the big issue and really kind of focus on a small issue and a small thing that you can fix. So the first one is write down the main problem. Quantify what you think is the biggest worry that you've got at the moment. Okay. Number 2, for that problem, write down as many possible solutions as there are, even the negative ones. Okay. Number 3, think about each of those solutions in practical terms. Number 4, choose the most practical solution that you can. Number 5, plan out with your instructor how you will carry out that solution. And number 6, and the most important one, is to actually do it. So what you've done there is taken perhaps a large dilemma and work through some of the areas and through perhaps some of the solutions to come out at the end of it with one small goal that you might very easily be able to fix. And by working through that process and trying to start with small bite-sized manageable chunks, you might find that you're going to start feeling a little bit better about the whole prospect of driving again. Number 4, and probably the most important part of this video, the way that you're feeling, your anxieties, your worries, your fears, it isn't your fault. You haven't brought these about yourself. You know, these last sort of few months in lockdown have been probably the most surreal ever in history. What's really good though is that you are watching this video because clearly you want to do something about the way that you feel. Those of you who are able to talk to others on social media, or your family or your friends or your instructor, that's great. That's a really important first step. But what you don't want to do is to bury your head in the sand and try to forget about it and to walk away. You know, I've done that on so many occasions, and I've never confronted my fears, and it's never ever kind of come round, and it's never kind of just, I've been able to divert it and get round it. I've always had to kind of face that. So again, don't be afraid to take that first step in talking to somebody about it. So like I mentioned earlier in the video, if you are watching this and you are particularly anxious at the prospect of driving and you think you would benefit from additional support, or you've not been able to talk to anybody about the way you're feeling, this online resource will be perfect, and I'm really confident it will support you in getting you to where you need to be. So the online course is called Driving Test Nerves. Now, even though it's got driving test in the title, it is quite a generic modular based resource. Within the course, you'll be looking at things like how your mind works, and there are some real tips and some strategies to help you to overcome some of the anxiety and perhaps some of that negative self-talk that you perhaps you kind of do experience. Like I mentioned, I've only got a number of free spaces, so it is very much a first come, first serve basis. So if you're watching this and thinking that you'll benefit from having access to this fantastic online resource, message me below and I'll get back to you with more information. Okay, so they were just a few tips and strategies that you might want to consider as you approach your lessons again, and as you approach your test. Like they say, that the online resource is a fantastic tool if you're sat there and you are particularly worried about the prospect of getting in the car again. So please consider that as a really viable resource. Thanks again for watching, and as always, if you're able to, please subscribe to the channel and press that bell icon for notification of future videos. In the meantime, thanks again, and I will see you soon. Take care.